Good evening, Americans, and welcome to The Ed Show, live from Minneapolis. Let's get to work.
God blesses everyone who is kind to the poor.
Government is not the solution to our problem.
But champion of those less fortunate.
Don't simply feed fish.
Government is the problem.
Don't simply feed fish.
Donations to the Reverend Moon.
When you are hot for Jesus Christ, there is nothing that is like that life.
Pope Francis has made himself a champion of those less fortunate.
The man who is quickly becoming the people's pope.
Don't simply feed fish.
Choose for Jesus.
Let's love people.
Read about Jehovah's Witness.
Our nation needs to stop doing for people what they can and should do for themselves.
How about Buddhism?
Income inequality is one of the biggest issues out there in America.
Try to explain where we are, how we got there.
The redliners, the vultures, they're just rolling.
But we have to face the truth.
Good to have you with us tonight, folks. Thanks for watching. As we head into this Thanksgiving weekend, it's important to keep the issue of income inequality on the front burner. Many Americans this Thanksgiving will be forced to work and work for low wages. Some won't even be able to afford a Thanksgiving dinner. I've shown you the vulture chart many times here on The Ed Show. Since the early 1980s, income inequality has been an issue. The top 1% have really benefited. Their wages have skyrocketed, while workers' wages have stayed virtually the same or flatlined. It's a fact. This is the product of so-called trickle-down economics. If you can blame it all on one guy, this is the guy. Ronald Reagan's economic policy laid down the foundation for income inequality in this country. The first thing he did as president was pass sweeping tax breaks for everyone, but especially the wealthy. In July of 1981, Reagan laid out his backwards plan for America's growth in a primetime address. Armed with a series of charts, Reagan said trickle-down economics was the way to go.
Their tax cut is slightly more generous than ours for the first 2 years. Then, as you can see, their tax bill, the dotted line, starts going up and up and up. On the other hand, in our bipartisan tax bill, the solid line, our tax cut, keeps on going down and then stays down permanently. This is true of all earning brackets.
One short week later, Reagan's tax cut passed. It was the largest tax cut our nation had ever seen. Everyone got a break, but the top tax rate fell from 70% down to 50%. No doubt a major win for the top 1% income earners in this country. Here's the vulture chart again. The green line marks the beginning of Reagan's trickle-down plan. This is when his tax cuts passed. So it just so happens it is the same time income inequality started to skyrocket in America. This is proof trickle-down economics is a sham. It doesn't work. Income inequality is becoming such a major issue, even with the Pope. The Pope is speaking out against it, making big news this week. The Pope made, I think, a stunning political statement, connecting it to faith. Pope Francis is slamming Reaganomics. In a statement, the Pope criticized the idolatry of money and warned it would lead to a new tyranny. A new tyranny? What does that mean? Does that mean that if I go to the Catholic Church in Detroit Lakes, Minnesota, that I'm going to hear the priest talk about a new tyranny? The Pope also called out trickle-down economics by name, saying this: some people continue to defend trickle-down theories, which assume that economic growth encouraged by a free market will inevitably succeed in bringing about greater justice in the world. He went on to say, this opinion, which has never been confirmed by the facts, expresses a crude and naive trust in the goodness of those yielding economic power. Meanwhile, the excluded are still waiting. Basically, as I interpret that, the Pope is saying trickle-down economics doesn't work. The poor in this world are still waiting. The poor in this country are still waiting. The poor in this country are under attack by Republican policies. Now, I don't know if the Pope is a Democrat or not. Certainly it's scripturally based, but no pontiff has ever been so bold to speak out in this manner. The Pope sounds more like Senators Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren than he does Ronald Reagan and devout congressional Catholic Paul Ryan. Conservatives have been maybe genuflecting to the wrong guy. Republicans are against everything this new Pope stands for. Pope Francis wants to fix income inequality, wants to help the poor. Look at the Republican budget. Meanwhile, here's what Republicans think about America's poor people.
If you look at China, they don't have food stamps. If you look at China, they're in a very different situation. They save for their own retirement security. They don't have AFDC. They don't have the modern welfare state, and China's growing.
Think about that. Nearly every state in America, people are getting food stamps who are able-bodied citizens, not elderly, without children.
The area where you can actually do some work under the Senate rules is cutting entitlement programs.
Can you control government spending without fundamentally reforming entitlements? I think the answer is no.
I think it's insensitive to not have work requirements to food stamps.
I wonder what the Pope would say about Congressman Paul Ryan's stance on entitlement cuts for the poor and how callous the Republicans have been with their proposed budgeting. It really is shameful. Basically, I believe that the Pope is trying to raise social awareness, but he's also calling out those who are pushing policies that directly hurt the poor. And that's what's happening in this country. We're having this big budget debate. We've got yet another deadline. And what do the Republicans want to do? They want to cut billions of dollars out of the food stamp program and hurt the most vulnerable? This Pope isn't talking to a third world country that is poor. This Pope is talking to a wealthy country that has the wherewithal to do the morally correct thing and provide for those who have been less fortunate in this trickle-down economy that started with the Republicans and Ronald Reagan back in the 80s. It doesn't work. Get your cell phones out. I want to know what you think. Tonight's question: is the almighty dollar Republicans' true religion? Text A for yes, text B for no to 67622. You can always go to our blog at ed.msnbc.com and leave a comment there. We'll bring you the results later on in the show. For more on this, let me turn now to E.J. Dionne of the Washington Post. E.J., great to have you with us tonight. I'm not totally up on my pontiff history, but in my lifetime, I can't remember a pope being so politically direct on what the social responsibility is to wealthy nations. That was my read on it. What was yours?
Well, it's good to be here on the Reverend Ed show on this eve of Thanksgiving. And I just have to say, hearing Michelle Bachmann say that we should follow China's lead on food stamps, I've always wanted to ask her why she wants to take her lead on social policy from a communist dictatorship. But that's not our subject today. I think that the Pope is, in fact, very consistent with a long run of Catholic social thought that goes all the way back to Leo XIII of Rerum Novarum. But this Pope has given it more power, more candor, and just a straightforwardness. And I think that comes from the fact that he's a pope from the South. He is from Argentina. And this statement is really extraordinary. He says, today, everything comes under the laws of competition and the survival of the fittest, where the powerful feed upon the powerless. As a consequence, he goes on, masses of people find themselves excluded and marginalized without work, without possibilities, without any means of escape. And so I think what this Pope, bear in mind, he is still against abortion. But what he is saying is that his real priority is on this question of poverty, injustice, and the problems with unregulated capitalism. He could not be more direct. And I think a lot of Catholic Republicans are going to have to look at their consciences and say, you know, Rush Limbaugh attacked the Pope today. The Pope said these things. Maybe they're going to have to rethink a little bit. I hope they do.
Well, it certainly is bringing forth a social awareness and a new consciousness within the Catholic Church. But if I go to the Detroit Lakes Catholic Church in the middle of the country in Minnesota, am I going to hear the priest talk about a new tyranny? What do you think the Pope meant by that?
Well, I think he talks about a tyranny that develops when money is an idol, as he has put it in another talk, when materialism is your guide and not spiritual values, not the values of gratitude, which we're celebrating tomorrow, gratitude and compassion. And so I think that one of the big questions is, how much will this Pope's message, as it were, to use a concept he's against, trickle down to the rest of the church? And I think you're seeing it in some parishes. And I have noticed that a lot of more progressive leaders of the church have taken heart from this. And I think they have become more aggressive in saying, the Catholic Church can't just be about abortion and gay marriage. The Catholic Church has always been about social justice and care for the poor.
Well, this is now economic justice, and social justice and economic justice clearly parallel one another, but no pope, to my knowledge, has ever put it in such direct terms. His comment that the excluded are still waiting, I mean, that is a direct slam that the economic policies of trickle down, and he uses the term trickle down economics, and says that the excluded are still waiting, is a direct shot at it being a failed policy. It doesn't work. It's not the way to run a railroad, for lack of a better term, but they're still waiting. In other words, the wealthy, you need to do more. I mean, now that's my interpretation. I could be totally off base, but that's the way I read it. When he says the excluded are still waiting.
I think that's the only way to read it. I think he is very direct here. He has this great line where he says, how can it be that it is not a news item when an elderly homeless person dies of exposure, but it is a news item when the stock market loses 2 points? I mean, you can't be more direct than he has been. And so, I think he is really calling advocates of pure capitalism to account.
So how are Republican Catholics like Congressman Paul Ryan, who happens to be the chairman of the House Budget Committee, with a radical budget, how's he going to deal with this?
I think it's going to be difficult, but here's an optimistic scenario, Ed. I think there are conservatives out there who are not radical Tea Party conservatives, who in the past have not voted in lockstep to cut food stamps the way the Republicans did. And I think they're going to have to ask themselves, how does their view of social programs square with those of a pope who specifically goes after those who reject the right of states, meaning governments, to stand up for the common good? So there may be a pulling back from this radicalism. Compassionate conservatism had its flaws, but it's sure better than the uncompassionate kind.
Is this current situation of income inequality in America and in the European countries as well, is it proof that Reaganomics is a sham? I think it is.
Well, I think your chart shows it, that, the idea that you can solve any problem in the country by throwing money at rich people just doesn't work. It hasn't worked from the beginning. And it's this whole idea, well, they're the job creators and everyone else doesn't count. Catholic social teaching has always really leaned toward labor and says that labor creates value. Abraham Lincoln talked about labor creating value, so that I don't think you can say that it's that if your emphasis is all on capital, you are missing a big part of the story and almost all the people doing the work.
Well, there is no way that I think fair-minded Americans can read this speech by the Pope and say that the faith matches up with the Republican ideology on how we should run our finances in this country. There's no question about that, at least as I see it. E.J. Dionne, it is great to have you with us. You have a great Thanksgiving and a nice holiday. We'll see you back here again on The Ed Show. Thanks so much. Remember to answer tonight's question there at the bottom of the screen. Share your thoughts with us on Twitter @EdShow and on Facebook. You might have a lot to say about this. We certainly want to know what you think.